Okay, so hello, I'm Shay and I'll be taking you through what popular maths is, why we need it, and sort of the techniques of how it works. So to start off with, let's define what it actually is. And to put it simply, popular maths is a genre of mathematical publication or presentation whose sole purpose is really to make maths accessible to those who may not otherwise have access to it in its sort of formal format, which we're all familiar with sort of textbooks and lecture notes. So why is it needed? Well, Professor Steve Chin, who is a professor in America and he's also a maths teacher, he says that maths makes people feel anxious. And so because of this, they try to avoid it. But in a globalizing world where mathematics is really becoming increasingly important, we can't really escape it. It's simply everywhere. Just in the past year, we've seen graphs and stats on our TVs almost every day, sort of relating to the COVID situation, and we need to know what they mean in order to sort of understand our lives. But according to the Department for Business Innovation and Skills in the UK, more than half of the UK's post-16 population have nothing more than GCSE level numeracy skills. And this is either because they never really got on well with maths in school and so have lost interest in it, or because they simply just don't have access to it in sort of the formal presentation style, which we're all familiar with. And it's sort of almost gatekeeping maths away from the masses. So as I'm sure you're aware, GCSE level numeracy skills don't really equip us with sort of skills we need to deal with a lot of things in life. And so this is where popular maths comes in. So what makes it different to formal maths? How does it work? Well, it actually employs quite a number of techniques, which include, but of course are not limited to, using specialized and dynamic layouts, which make the document more fun and exciting and interesting to sort of look at and read. It also involves empathizing with the reader and sort of having that realization that actually they're not necessarily mathematically minded or confident in maths, and so they may not automatically follow your train of thought without some additional prompting. We'd also use some language techniques which sort of come together to escape that rigid formality of textbook maths, which may scare people away. And another good thing to do is to take really atypical approaches to mathematical topics and have a look at them in unusual ways. And this can cultivate the reader's interests in, again, a fun and exciting way. So let's have a dive into some of these techniques more in depth. And we'll start with the layout of the document. So before the reader even begins reading, they'll take a glance at the presentation of the document, sort of how it looks, and it therefore needs to be quite visually appealing to make the reader sort of want to read it. And this is just like with any book, really. You want it to look nice, so people want to see what it's about, and they may go ahead and actually read it. So a good way to do this is to use some colourful diagrams in order to make it look more friendly and stand out. Think about how dull and even daunting some of the diagrams in our lecture notes and textbooks sometimes are, and consider how sort of scary they may be to someone who's non-mathematically minded. Another good thing to do is don't let LaTeX decide where the graphics are going to go on your page. Have the text wrap around them. Have them next to any text that they relate to, so the reader doesn't have to flick back and forth between pages. This links into the next thing as well. We shouldn't really label or number our figures or equations. Again, this gives it a bit of a sort of scary textbook feel. And if we're placing the equations and figures properly, then it sort of alleviates the need for captioning and cross-referencing figures. So coming up on your screen now, you should have two documents. You don't need to be able to read them, but just have a look at them. They both describe the symmetries of the dihedral group B4. The left one is from a set of lecture notes, and the one on the right is from a popular article which I've written as part of my project, which uses biscuits to describe that very same group. I know which one looks more appealing to me. It's the one on the right, and that's what I set out to do. The diagrams look a lot more friendly and colourful. There's not equations dotted around, and it's very sort of down to earth in how it talks about this group. So now let's think about empathizing with the reader, which was the second sort of technique category. So abstractions and generalizations of equations can be quite confusing to non-mathematical people, and it's often done to be concise. But in popular maths, we're not that interested in being concise. Instead, we're aiming to sort of expand on ideas and sort of look at formulas in a more well-rounded way to help people understand them. And so we want to give as much detail to the reader as possible to create sort of a good visualization in their head of what's actually going on to help them understand it all. So we need to realize that symbols and equations can be quite daunting, especially to a non-mathematical mind. They're quite hard to remember and hard to understand. So think how you feel when you see the cubic equation formula. And if you haven't seen it, look it up after this talk. It can be quite scary because it's so long, and the way you feel about that is how some people feel about some things that are quite simple to us, like Pythagoras' theorem, for example. And so we really need to consider that throughout and think people might be scared of all these formulas, avoid them. And a good way to do that is to make connections to the real world. People interested in reading and to help them understand what you're talking about. So it's all about making the maths relatable. So it's important to remember that the reader is not in school anymore. They don't have to read your article. They need to want to read it. And so a good way to make them want to read it is to make it about something that they are already interested in and they already understand to an extent. And a good example, which is quite relevant at the moment in popular science, is how Professor Jonathan Van Tam at the government conferences often uses analogies of football to describe the developments in the spread and prevention of COVID. And that's a really sort of clever way to help people understand what's going on in a way that they already sort of understand. I've got another example here. This is from a really nice book I've read, which links group theory to flipping a mattress, which I think is genius because anyone can sort of picture flipping a mattress. Everyone knows what that looks like. And so it makes group theory so much easier to understand, and it just makes it so much more relatable, which makes it easier to learn about. So here's a typical way of showing the dihedral group D4 in sort of a textbook or lecture notes settings. And it uses a Cayley table and some matrix notation. And this is really good, but to someone who doesn't have a mathematical background, this can be quite confusing with all this notation and all these letters and symbols. And so here's how I presented the symmetries of that very same group in my popular article. My article was about Sudoku puzzles. So as you can see, it's not too abstracted from that. It uses Sudoku grids and it's all visual. It has arrows representing what's happening. And as I say, it's directly related to Sudoku puzzles. So it sort of shows the reader why they're learning about this. So next, let's have a look at some language techniques. So it's really important to avoid sounding like a textbook. I've said that a few times, but it's so important. And to do this, we can use some informal language, perhaps. So talk to the reader as a friend. This will help them sort of feel involved and get them engaged with what's going on. And think about how much easier it is to learn when it's more personal. For example, when you're with a lecturer and they're talking directly to you, it's a lot easier to learn, and you sort of have to recreate that on paper. So we try and treat the reader as a friend. So involve them, use a friendly tone, don't be too formal about it, and talk to them as if you, or as you would with a friend in a cafe or in a pub, for example, if they asked about this mathematical topic. It also shows the reader that you're human too. So you're not a supercomputer that does maths and only maths. And it really shows that if you can do it, they have a chance of being able to understand it too. Also show some show your human side again by involving some digressions, get sidetracked and sort of keep the reader interested through that. Remember you're writing for someone who is not necessarily mathematically minded, and so you may need to motivate them along the way and allow them to see the sort of base camps along the way to the final result and be happy about that. So let's take a quick look at some atypical approaches to maths as well. So we should seek to be self-contained in popular maths. There should be no sort of referencing other texts or prerequisites or anything. There shouldn't be any sort of see this book or recall this result. All the information the reader needs should be given. We should try to use anecdotes and sort of stories to segue into topics as well. It makes it more interesting. It tells the reader why they need to know what you're telling them. So it'll sort of make them want to learn. Another big thing here is to remember that you don't need to be correct to the letter of the textbook definitions. So for example, and some people hate me for this, I found it easy in A-level to think of the dy by dx notation for derivatives as a fraction in some instances, because it really does behave that way sometimes. Think about sort of separation of variables and implicit differentiation, and you can sort of see where I'm coming from there. So that concludes my sort of whistle-stop tour of some of the most important techniques in my mind for popularising mathematical topics. I do hope it adds some meaning to you, and I want to end with this quote from Stephen Strogatz, who's a very famous maths professor and math populariser, and I think it really nicely sums up what popular maths aims to do. So it says, if you want someone to follow your mathematical dispositions voluntarily, or better yet, happily, you have to help him or her love the questions you're asking. So thank you very much for listening. If you'd like some more details on what I've talked about, or if you'd like to read my attempt at writing a popular maths article, please do contact me and you can have a look at my report. And other than that, I'd like to open up to questions if anyone's got any. Thank you.